Hi everyone, this is Krista from Spirit and Thread Crochet, and today I'm going to walk you through how to add beads and jewelry findings to your crochet tops. This top that I'm wearing is made using one of my tutorials. I will link to that so that you can find it easily if you want to replicate what I'm wearing. And I'm going to walk you through 3 different ways that you can add beads sewn into your work, built into each individual crochet stitch, or attached with jewelry findings. Each of these ways requires different materials and skill levels, so follow along to find the right way for you. At the end, you'll have a top looking like this. So for method 1, we're going to be sewing with a small needle beads onto the yarn that we're actually working with. So that will require a small needle, beads that have a hole that's big enough to go through a piece of yarn and your needle, and then yarn for your project that's thin enough to go through the beads that you're using. So for me, this project uses size 3 or 4 yarn. I'm going to use 2 strands of size 2 yarn so that I can weave my beads onto one of the strands. If I was using normal size 3 or 4 yarn, it'd be pretty hard to find beads that have big enough holes to go onto the yarn itself. So I'm going to use 2 strands of size 2 instead, and I'm going to cut one of those strands to prepare to sew some beads onto it. So you want to have it on the side that's attached to your skein, otherwise it won't be able to go over the knot that you tie to rejoin your yarn. So use the side of the yarn where you cut off that's attached to your skein, and then you're going to carefully get your yarn through your needle. I find that getting the yarn through the needle can sometimes be the hardest step. It's just annoying. All right, so I'm ready to begin sewing my beads on. And you want to put all the beads that you'll need for this row or the project that you're working on, sew them all onto your yarn at the same time. Otherwise, you're going to have to cut your yarn again and re-put it through the needle. So you want to string all these beads on so they're ready to go. Okay, I have enough beads all ready to go, so now I can take my needle off and reattach where I cut my yarn. And now I'm ready to continue my project. So I have my first single crochet here, and I'm going to add my stitches for my shells at the end because that's where I'm going to add my beads. So in my middle stitch is where I want my bead to fall. So I'm going to begin my triple crochet and then just place my bead where I want it as I create that stitch. So I just incorporated that bead into the middle of this triple crochet. I'm going to add a picot. There it is in the middle of my stitch. I kind of like to pull the bead toward me a bit so that it lies on the side of my stitch that I want. I want to make sure it doesn't get hidden on the other side of the stitch, so I just pull it forward. And as I finish out this stitch, it'll add enough density that forces that bead to the front. And there it is. That's how this will look. So I'm going to do that one more time for you. I'm beginning my next shell. I want my bead to go into my middle triple crochet. So I have my bead prepped here. I am going to get my bead ready and place it where I'd like it in the middle of that triple crochet. Continue the stitch. I'm going to pull my bead toward me a bit so it is facing the right side of my project. and finishing my shell stitch. The most annoying part of this method is really just keeping the beads on your strand out of your way because they continue to move closer to you as you're using your yarn. So here's how this method will look with these shells. You can also include them in simple stitches. So let me do just a couple others for samples here. Say I want to add it in a single crochet row. You add a single crochet, you create a single crochet and just place the bead where you want it within the stitch itself. Here's how it will look for a half double crochet row. And again, I kind of pull it toward me. Place my next stitch and then position it on the right side of my project. And here's a double crochet row. So you're really crocheting as usual, but you're placing your beads where you'd like as you crochet the stitch. This method is really helpful because you have fewer ends to sew in. You can add beads as you work, placing them wherever you'd like. Some of the downsides are sometimes the beads you want to use don't have large enough holes to actually sew onto your string. Maybe your yarn is thicker and you can't use beads at all. And also you have to anticipate how many beads you'll need for your project before you begin. Otherwise you'll have to continue to cut your yarn and sew more beads on as you go. So it has its pros and its cons, as you'll see with each of these methods. The next method is to sew your beads directly onto your project using a thinner thread, potentially a thinner needle, and any size bead, a bead with any size hole. The benefit of this method is that you can use beads with smaller holes because you can then use smaller thread to weave through the bead. But for explanation purposes, I'm going to continue to use my same yarn. It's a little bit easier to see than the invisible thread. So again, we're going to use our needle and weave our invisible thread or our yarn through the needle. I'm going to attach my yarn to the wrong side of my project, the side that we won't be able to see, by weaving back and forth a few times. You can even tie a knot. So I'm going to do that for extra security. So now I'm going to prepare by getting my hook in the right placement for where I want my bead to go on the proper side of my project. So I went back and forth a few times to secure my yarn, but now I feel very good about how secure it is, and I am going to get into position with where I want to place that bead. So I want that bead to be at the top of this shell right here, right in this stitch. So I have my yarn in position. I'm then going to put my bead through my needle onto my yarn, and then using the needle go through my stitch on the other side to place my bead where I'd like it. Now I want this to be very secure, so I'm going to go back and forth a few times, securing my needle and my yarn through one more stitch to really fasten it in place, and then go back through that stitch before my bead, and then go back through my bead one more time. I like going through the beads each a minimum of 2 times just to make sure that if anything happens to my yarn or my thread, it's still very secure. So there we go. My bead is nice and secure where I'd like it. And now I want to secure this yarn again on the back side of my project. So I'm going to insert my needle and pull through to the back side. And then retie to secure the 2 ends of this original piece of yarn or thread. Tie it very tight. and fasten off. This final method is my favorite, but it's also the most complicated and it requires the most tools. I have a lot of jewelry making supplies because I dabbled in jewelry making in the past, and my favorite way to add chains, beads, and other findings like these gold coins is to use jewelry findings like head pins, eye pins, these jump rings, maybe some chain, other findings, and charms, whatever you want to add, and using jewelry making pliers to fasten them into your project. I'm going to show you a few different ways to do that using these materials here. And all of this you could probably get on Amazon or at your local craft store. I'm going to begin creating a piece to add here in this front middle shell. I want it to have one bead and then one gold coin hanging from that bead. So to do that, I'm going to use one of my eye pins and both pairs of pliers. So first I'm going to add the charm into this open eye pin at the bottom. I'm going to take my charm, open up this loop, and add that gold coin into this loop, reclosing it using these pliers here. Now I'm going to add a gold bead, and I'm going to prepare to add it into the top of this picot stitch right here. So to do that, I need to create a loop at the top of this eye pin. I'm going to fold the end of the eye pin down toward the bead at a 90-degree angle. I'm going to use these rounded point pliers to snip off any extra space, leaving about a centimeter. And then I'm going to turn this into another open loop that I can weave through my stitch by grabbing it between my two rounded points and rolling it into a circle. And I want the tip of that circle to end at the base of the other end. So I just created my loop here. I'm going to reopen it a bit and place it through the tip of this picot stitch. Now, a point about working with metal jewelry findings is that for this project, I'm going to want to hand wash it or get really high quality jewelry findings that they won't rust if they get wet on repeat. So I will end up hand washing this project just to make sure that everything stays safely attached and that it doesn't rust. I opened up that loop, inserted it through, and then just closed it back up. And now I have this cute little gold charm in my center picot here. Now on these two shell stitches, I want to have a chain attached on each ends that will then dip beneath this gold chain here, this gold charm here. So I'm going to measure out how long I need that chain to be, and then create a piece of chain that's the appropriate length. So now I have this smaller piece of chain ready to be attached. To attach the chain, I'm going to use 2 jump rings. I'm going to open these up using my pliers. Insert the chain onto that jump ring and then insert the jump ring into the tip of the picot and close the jump ring back up. Now it's joined on one end. I'll join on the other using the same process. Make sure my chain isn't turned. And insert this jump ring into the tip of the picot stitch. Close it up. And there we go. Now I have this chain draping over my gold coin here. I think it'll be fun to add another gold coin in the middle of this chain. So I'll do that using another jump ring and a gold coin. So I'll open up my jump ring, put my gold coin onto it, find the middle of this chain, and attach my jump ring and close it up. So here's how this looks so far. I also want to show you how to use head pins. And head pins are these findings here with a flat end, so a bead can just stay right on this piece here. I'm going to put my bead on the head pin. Using my pliers, bend this head pin downward, again at about a 90-degree angle. To create my loop, using my rounded point pliers, I'll remove the extra space there and create the open end that I'll use to attach to my project. So just like that, I kind of made a little charm that I can attach onto my project. So I'm going to attach this little bead into this picot stitch right here. There it is. And close it up. And there's my little metal charm. So you can continue this process to customize your piece however you'd like. You can add chains overlapping. Perhaps I add a chain here and then I add a chain here. Perhaps I add little gold droplets between the chains. Perhaps I have some where it's just a gold bead and some where it's a gold bead and a gold coin. You can make this your own however you'd like. Here's a little status report. I added chains on every other shell in the front of my project, and I used a single jump ring to attach the chain on this side and the chain on this side. I repeated that almost all the way across my project, and then I added some coins at the bottom of each chain. Next, I'm going to continue to use head pins to add little metal bead charms on each open picot. And here's my final project. I have my beads built into my shell stitches, the bead that I sewed in, and my chains, charms, and beads that I added using jewelry findings and pliers. Thanks so much for following along. Happy crocheting!